Blood turned to ice in Beatrice Landon's veins as she clutched the letter in her trembling hands, the Montana Territory wind whipping through the cabin's poorly sealed windows. Her husband of barely a year, Marcus, had disappeared 3 days ago, just hours after she'd given birth to their son. Now, in cruel, hastily scrawled words, she knew why. "I never wanted to be a father. Don't try to find me." It was April 1876, and Beatrice was alone with a newborn in Timber Creek, a frontier mining settlement where winter still clung to the mountains. At 22, she had left her Pennsylvania home to marry a man who had promised her the world, only to abandon her when she needed him most. The baby's cry pulled her from her shock. Little William, named after her late father, needed to be fed. Beatrice wiped her tears and picked up her son, the only family she had left in this harsh territory. "We'll manage somehow," she whispered, though she had no idea how. Their cabin sat on the edge of town. Marcus had left them with almost nothing, and her small savings wouldn't last a month. 3 days later, Beatrice was desperately trying to calm William's colicky cries when a knock sounded at the door. Her heart leapt. Could Marcus have returned? But when she opened it, she found Quentin Tucker standing on her porch, hat in hand. Quentin was Timber Creek's most respected rancher. At 31, he was known for his fairness, hard work, and the way he kept to himself. His ranch employed half the men in town during cattle season, and though he wasn't unfriendly, he rarely socialized beyond business matters. "Mrs. Landon," he said, his voice deep and steady, though his blue eyes betrayed discomfort. "I heard about your situation. The storekeeper mentioned you haven't been in for supplies." Beatrice tried to straighten her disheveled appearance, acutely aware of her unwashed hair and the dark circles under her eyes. William continued to cry against her shoulder. "I'm managing, Mr. Tucker," she said, pride forcing strength into her voice despite the evidence to the contrary. Quentin's eyes took in the bare cabin behind her, the empty woodpile, the single lantern burning low, the obvious lack of food on the shelves. His gaze settled on the crying infant. "May I come in?" he asked. Too exhausted to refuse, Beatrice stepped aside. Quentin entered, placing a package on the table. "Some food from my housekeeper," he explained. "That's very kind, but I can't accept charity," Beatrice said. Even as her stomach rumbled audibly, Quentin's expression softened. "It's not charity, Mrs. Landon, it's being neighborly." He hesitated, then added, "I also came to offer you a position." "A position? My ranch needs a housekeeper. The cabin by the main house is empty, it's small but weathertight. You'd have food, shelter, and wages." His eyes moved to William, who had momentarily quieted. "For both of you." Beatrice's pride warred with practicality. "I don't know anything about keeping house on a ranch." "You'll learn," Quentin said simply. "My last housekeeper left to get married 2 months ago. I've been eating my own cooking since, which isn't fit for man nor beast." A hint of a smile touched his lips, and for the first time Beatrice noticed the handsome lines of his face beneath his weathered tan. "I'll need to think about it," she said, bouncing William as he began fussing again. Quentin nodded. "Of course, I'll come back tomorrow." He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Landon, what your husband did isn't right. No man worthy of the name abandons his family." His jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have to face this alone." After he left, Beatrice looked down at her son, then at the package Quentin had brought: bread, cheese, dried meat, and apples, more food than she had seen in days. By morning, her decision was made. 2 days later, Beatrice stood on the porch of a small but well-built cabin on the Tucker Ranch. The main house stood 100 yards away, with a barn and several outbuildings completing the central compound. Beyond stretched pastures, a small apple orchard, and in the distance, the foothills that rose to meet the mountains. Quentin helped carry her meager belongings inside. The cabin had a main room with a stove, table, and 2 chairs, plus a bedroom with a bed already made up with clean linens. A cradle sat beside it. The cradle. Beatrice began, touching the smooth wood. "Made it years ago for my sister's boy," Quentin explained. She moved back east, didn't want to take it on the journey. After settling in, Quentin explained her duties: cooking, cleaning, laundry, managing the household accounts, and occasionally helping with the garden. Her wages would be fair, he promised, with Sundays free except for essential chores. "The men don't come to the main house unless invited," he assured her. "You'll be safe here." That night, as William slept in the cradle, Beatrice cried silently into her pillow, not from despair as she had for many nights before, but from relief. They would survive. The first weeks were difficult. Beatrice had been raised in a comfortable middle-class home and had never managed a household on her own, let alone one on a working ranch. The stove smoked, her bread came out leaden, and she struggled to keep up with the laundry while caring for William. Quentin never complained. Instead, he quietly showed her how to adjust the stove damper, brought her a cookbook from town, and built a wash stand at the perfect height so she could work with William nearby. As April turned to May, Beatrice found her rhythm. She learned to time her baking around William's naps, to manage the household accounts in the evening, and to appreciate the peaceful rhythm of ranch life. The constant worries that had plagued her since Marcus's departure began to ease. One evening, Beatrice was hanging laundry while William lay on a blanket in the shade. Quentin approached from the corral, his shirt dampened with honest work, his hat shielding his eyes from the setting sun. "Mrs. Landon," he greeted her. "Dinner smells good, beef stew," she replied. "And I finally managed a decent batch of biscuits." He smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his serious face. "You're doing fine work here. The place hasn't felt this much like a home in years." Something warm flickered in Beatrice's chest at his words. "Mr. Tucker," she said hesitantly, "I've been wondering why you never married. A man with a successful ranch like yours." The smile faded from Quentin's face. "Had a fiancée once, Elizabeth. She died of typhoid fever before we could wed. That was 8 years ago." "I'm sorry," Beatrice said softly. "Life goes on," he said, his voice gruff. He knelt beside William, who gurgled and reached for his finger. "This little fellow's growing strong." "He is," Beatrice agreed. "Thanks to your generosity." Quentin looked up at her, his blue eyes intense. "It's not generosity, Mrs. Landon. You work hard for your keep. Still, you took us in when no one else would. Anyone worthy of calling themselves a neighbor would have done the same," he said, rising to his feet. "Some men in this world forget what matters. I try not to be one of them." As he walked away, Beatrice found herself watching his retreating figure longer than was proper. That night, after William was asleep, Beatrice sat on her porch in the cool evening air. The stars shone brilliantly in the Montana sky, and the distant howl of a wolf reminded her how far she was from the civilized Pennsylvania town where she'd grown up. She thought about Marcus, his charming smile, his grand promises, and ultimately his cowardice. She'd loved him once, or thought she had. Now she wondered if she'd ever really known him at all. Her reflections were interrupted by the sound of a guitar. The gentle melody drifted from the direction of the main house, where a lamp still burned in the window. Quentin was playing, his skill surprising her. The tune was melancholy but beautiful, speaking of loneliness and resilience. June brought warmer weather and longer days. The ranch bustled with activity as several hands returned for the summer season. Beatrice found herself cooking for a crew of hungry men once a week when they came in from the range. One Sunday afternoon, Quentin knocked on her cabin door. "Mrs. Landon, I'm riding into town for supplies. Would you and William care to join me? Might do you good to get away from the ranch for a spell." The invitation surprised her. In the 2 months she'd been there, she'd only left the ranch once, when Quentin had taken her to purchase fabric for new curtains. "That would be lovely," she said. "Give me a moment to get William ready." They rode in Quentin's wagon, William secure in Beatrice's arms. The journey into Timber Creek took nearly an hour, and as they traveled, Quentin pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the area's history. His knowledge of the land was impressive, and Beatrice found herself genuinely interested. "My father brought me here when I was 16, he explained. "Started the ranch with nothing but 50 head of cattle and determination. When he passed 5 years ago, he left it to me to build further. He'd be proud of what you've accomplished," Beatrice said. Quentin glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "I hope so." In town, people stared openly at Beatrice with the baby walking alongside Quentin Tucker. She heard whispers, felt judgmental eyes, and held her head higher in response. While Quentin loaded supplies, Beatrice ducked into the general store for thread. The shopkeeper's wife, Mrs. Henderson, a notorious gossip, approached immediately. "Mrs. Landon," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "How interesting to see you settled at the Tucker Ranch. People have been wondering about your situation." Beatrice met the woman's eyes steadily. My situation is that I'm employed as Mr. Tucker's housekeeper, nothing more, nothing less. Of course, Mrs. Henderson said, not bothering to hide her disbelief. Though a young widow with a baby living alone with an unmarried man, well, people will talk. Beatrice felt her cheeks flush. Mr. Tucker has been nothing but respectful and kind, unlike some who call themselves Christians yet spread malicious gossip. She paid for her thread and left, heart pounding with indignation. Outside, she nearly collided with Quentin, who had finished loading the wagon. "You all right?" he asked, noticing her flushed face. "Fine," she said shortly. "Just reminded that small towns have long memories and busy tongues." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Mrs. Henderson," Beatrice nodded. "Pay her no mind," he said. "Though if the talk bothers you—" "It doesn't," Beatrice interrupted, then softened her tone. "Well, it does, but I won't let it dictate my choices. You've given my son and me a chance when we had none. I won't repay that kindness by concerning myself with idle gossip." A look of respect passed over Quentin's face. "You're stronger than you know, Mrs. Landon." Before she could respond, a commotion erupted from the saloon across the street. A man staggered out, clearly drunk despite the early hour, shouting at someone inside. Beatrice froze, her blood running cold. Marcus. Her husband swayed on his feet, unshaven and disheveled, but unmistakably him. Beatrice instinctively clutched William tighter, drawing the attention of Quentin, who followed her gaze. "That's him, isn't it?" he asked quietly. Before she could answer, Marcus spotted her. His bloodshot eyes widened, then narrowed as he staggered toward them. "Well, look who it is," he slurred. "My devoted wife and—" He squinted at Quentin. "Tucker, you're with Tucker now. Didn't waste any time, did you?" Quentin stepped slightly in front of Beatrice. "You're drunk, Landon. Go sleep it off." Marcus laughed bitterly, defending her honor. "There's not much to defend. She trapped me with that brat, you know, claimed she couldn't have children, then surprise." He gestured wildly at William. "Hope you enjoy my leavings, Tucker." Quentin moved with surprising speed. In one fluid motion, he grabbed Marcus by the shirt collar and pushed him against a hitching post. "That's the mother of your child you're insulting," he said, his voice dangerously low. "A woman you abandoned without a second thought. A decent man would be ashamed." A crowd was gathering. Beatrice stepped forward, William beginning to cry from the tension. "Quentin, don't. He's not worth it." At the sound of his name, his first name, which she'd never used before, Quentin released Marcus, who slumped against the post. "You're right," Quentin said. "He's not." He turned to Marcus, contempt evident in his expression. "The boy deserves better than you for a father." Marcus spat on the ground. "He can have him, you both can. You'll raise him with me instead. Is that it, Tucker, playing family with my wife?" "Ex-wife," Beatrice said suddenly, finding her voice. "As far as I'm concerned, you died the day you walked out on us. William and I are better off without you." She turned to Quentin. "Please, let's go home." The word home hung in the air between them as they climbed into the wagon and left Marcus standing in the dust, shouting obscenities that faded as they drove away. They traveled in silence for several miles, William eventually falling asleep against Beatrice's shoulder. Finally, Quentin spoke. "I apologize for losing my temper." "Don't," Beatrice said. "What you did defending us, no one's ever done that for me before." Quentin's hands tightened on the reins. "He had no right to speak to you that way, no right to abandon you and William." "No, he didn't," Beatrice agreed, "but it's done. And in a strange way, I'm grateful. If Marcus hadn't left, I wouldn't have found—" She stopped, unsure how to continue. "Found what?" Quentin asked, his voice gentle. "A place where William and I can belong," she finished, though that wasn't exactly what she'd meant to say. Quentin was quiet for a long moment. "You do belong, Beatrice, both of you." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about the way he said it made her heart beat faster. By mid-July, life at the Tucker Ranch had settled into a comfortable routine. William was growing rapidly, now able to roll over and showing signs of crawling soon. Beatrice had transformed the main house with fresh curtains and tablecloths, filled the pantry with preserves from the garden, and even learned to make Quentin's favorite apple pie from the early fruit in the orchard. More significant than these visible changes was the invisible shift in her relationship with Quentin. Since the confrontation with Marcus, the formality between them had gradually dissolved. They often sat on the porch of the main house after dinner, talking as the sun set. She called him Quentin now, and he called her Beatrice. Sometimes he played his guitar while she mended or knitted. Other times they simply enjoyed the companionable silence. One evening, as Beatrice rocked William to sleep in her cabin, a thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains. The summer storm was fierce, with lightning splitting the sky and thunder that rattled the windows. William, startled from his near sleep, began to wail. As she tried to comfort him, a particularly close lightning strike illuminated the cabin, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The lights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. Heart-pounding, Beatrice clutched William close, trying to remain calm for his sake. A knock at the door made her jump. "Beatrice," Quentin's voice called through the door, "are you all right?" "We're fine," she called back, though her shaking voice betrayed her, just startled by the storm. The door opened and Quentin appeared with a lantern. Rain had soaked his shirt and plastered his dark hair to his forehead. "Lightning hit close," he said, "knocked out the generator. I wanted to make sure you were safe." William continued to cry, inconsolable amid the storm's fury. "Here," Quentin said, setting down the lantern and holding out his arms. "May I?" Surprised, Beatrice handed William to him. Quentin cradled the baby with unexpected expertise, speaking in a low, soothing voice that seemed to cut through the baby's fear. "It's just a storm, little man. Nothing but water and light and sound. Nothing to fear when you're safe inside." Gradually, William's cries subsided. He stared up at Quentin with wide eyes, hiccuping occasionally as his tiny hand clutched the rancher's finger. "You're good with him," Beatrice said softly. Quentin smiled, his face gentle in the lantern light. "My sister's children, I helped with them when they were small before they moved east." Another crack of thunder sounded, closer this time, and the cabin's walls shuddered with the force of it. William began to cry again, and Quentin looked concerned. "This cabin isn't as sturdy as the main house," he said. "Would you feel safer there until the storm passes?" Beatrice hesitated only briefly before nodding. They made a dash through the rain, Quentin sheltering William with his coat while Beatrice carried the lantern. By the time they reached the main house, they were both soaked. In the parlor, a fire burned in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Quentin disappeared briefly, returning with towels and one of his own shirts. "You can change in my room," he said, handing her the shirt. "It'll be big, but at least it's dry." While Beatrice changed, Quentin settled William on a blanket near the fire. When she returned, wearing his shirt that hung to her knees, Quentin was sitting cross-legged on the floor, letting William grasp at a wooden toy horse he'd carved. Something about the domestic scene, Quentin with her son in the firelight, made Beatrice's heart constrict with an emotion she wasn't ready to name. "Thank you," she said, sitting beside them on the rug, "for everything." Quentin looked up, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "No need for thanks between friends." "Is that what we are?" Beatrice asked softly. "Friends?" A charged silence filled the room, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the rumbling of now distant thunder. Quentin's gaze held hers, searching. "I'd like to think we're at least that," he said finally, "though sometimes." He stopped, looking down at William, who had fallen asleep between them. "Sometimes," Beatrice prompted. Quentin seemed to choose his words carefully. "Sometimes I find myself thinking of both of you as more than that, as family." He looked up, vulnerability clear in his expression. "I know it's not proper to say so, and I don't expect anything, but after Elizabeth died, I never thought I'd want a family again. And then you came with this little fellow, and everything changed." The honesty in his words took Beatrice's breath away. For months, she'd been fighting her growing feelings for this quiet, honorable man, telling herself it was too soon after Marcus, that she was merely grateful that he couldn't possibly feel the same. "Quentin," she began, her voice barely audible over the storm, "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," he replied quickly. "I shouldn't have spoken. It's too soon, and your situation—" "No," Beatrice interrupted. "It's not that, it's just—" She took a deep breath. "I've made one terrible mistake in trusting a man who didn't deserve it. I can't make another." Understanding dawned in Quentin's eyes. "You're afraid." "Terrified," she admitted. "Not of you, never of you, but of being wrong again, of trusting my heart when it's led me astray before." Quentin reached across the sleeping baby to take her hand. "Beatrice, I'm not asking for promises." I'm just telling you that my home is yours for as long as you want it, that I care for William as if he were my own, and that I've come to care for you in a way I never expected to feel again." Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes. "I care for you too," she whispered. "More than I should. More than makes sense after everything that's happened." The storm raged on outside, but in the warmth of the firelit room, something new and fragile was taking root between them, something that would need time and care to grow. August brought the county fair to Timber Creek, and Quentin insisted that Beatrice take a day off to attend with William. Since their conversation during the thunderstorm, they had been cautious with each other, neither rushing the tentative feelings growing between them. Quentin had been busy with ranch work, often returning after Beatrice and William were asleep, but he never failed to leave wildflowers on her porch or stop by in the morning to see William. The fair was William's first real outing, and at 6 months old, he was fascinated by the colors, sounds, and movement. Beatrice wore her best dress, one she'd remade from fabric Quentin had brought from town, and felt something like happiness as she carried William through the fairgrounds. Several of the ranch hands greeted her warmly, having come to respect the quiet dignity with which she managed the Tucker household. A few townspeople were cordial as well, though Mrs. Henderson and her circle made a point of turning away when Beatrice approached. Beatrice was admiring a display of quilts when she felt a hand on her elbow. She turned to find herself face to face with Marcus, sober this time and better dressed than when she'd last seen him, but with the same cold, calculating look in his eyes. "Beatrice," he said smoothly. "You're looking well." She stepped back, clutching William protectively. "What do you want, Marcus? Can't a man say hello to his wife and son?" "Ex-wife," she corrected firmly. "And you gave up any right to call him your son when you abandoned us." Marcus had the grace to look slightly ashamed. "I was frightened. Becoming a father, it was too much responsibility, but I've been thinking about it and I've decided I'm ready now." Beatrice stared at him in disbelief. "Ready? You think you can just walk away and come back whenever it suits you?" "We're still legally married, Beatrice," Marcus said, his voice hardening. "That's my son, I have rights." Fear clutched at Beatrice's heart. Legally, he was correct. Despite her claims, they were still married, and the law would favor a father's rights over a mother's. "You don't care about William," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "You never did." "Maybe not," Marcus admitted with a callousness that shocked her, "but I do care about appearances, and having my wife and son living with another man is bad for my reputation. I'm starting a business in Helena, and I need a respectable family image." The selfishness of his statement left Beatrice speechless. Before she could respond, another voice cut through the crowd. "There you are," Quentin said, appearing beside her. His expression was neutral, but Beatrice could see the tension in his jaw as he faced Marcus. "Everything all right?" "Fine," Marcus said tightly. "Just having a conversation with my wife about our future together." Quentin's eyes flickered to Beatrice, who shook her head slightly. "There is no future together, Marcus. You made that clear when you left." "I've changed my mind," Marcus insisted, "and as your husband, I have the legal right to insist you and the boy return with me to Helena." Quentin stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "You lost any moral right to call yourself her husband or that boy's father the moment you walked out on them. Legal papers be damned." Marcus's face flushed with anger. "This isn't your concern, Tucker. Stay out of my family affairs." "They became my concern when I found Beatrice alone, with no food and no fuel, caring for a newborn because you were too cowardly to face your responsibilities," Quentin replied, his control slipping slightly. A small crowd was beginning to gather, sensing conflict. Beatrice, mortified at becoming the center of attention, tried to defuse the situation. "This isn't the place, Marcus. If you truly want to discuss this, you can come to the ranch tomorrow." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "So Tucker can run me off his property? I don't think so." He looked between them, a calculating expression crossing his face. "Unless there's more between you two than employer and housekeeper. Is that it, Beatrice? You found yourself a wealthier man and decided to trade up." The accusation stung, especially because Beatrice knew how carefully she and Quentin had behaved, how respectful he had been of her vulnerable position. "That's enough," Quentin said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You will not speak to her that way," Marcus sneered. "I'll speak to my wife however I please." He reached for Beatrice's arm, but Quentin stepped between them. Touch her, and it will be the last thing you do, Quentin warned. For a tense moment, the two men faced each other, the crowd growing larger around them. Then, unexpectedly, Marcus laughed. Fine, have it your way for now, but this isn't over. He looked at Beatrice, his expression hardening. I'll be back with the sheriff. The law is on my side, and you know it. As Marcus walked away, Beatrice felt her knees weaken. Quentin steadied her with a gentle hand. He's right, she whispered, fighting tears. The law is on his side. If he wants to force us to go with him, he can. Quentin's expression was grim but determined. Not if you're no longer his wife. Divorce takes time, and in the territory, I wasn't talking about divorce, Quentin said softly. He glanced around at the curious onlookers and took her elbow. Let's go somewhere quieter. They walked to the edge of the fairgrounds, finding a bench beneath an old oak tree. William had fallen asleep despite the commotion, his head resting on Beatrice's shoulder. What did you mean, if I'm no longer his wife? Beatrice asked once they were seated. Quentin took a deep breath, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she'd come to recognize. I meant marriage, he said finally, meeting her eyes. To me, Beatrice stared at him, certain she'd misheard. Marriage, it's not how I wanted to ask, Quentin admitted, a rueful smile touching his lips. I had it all planned, a proper courtship first, then asking when the time was right. But Marcus has forced my hand. His expression grew serious. If you're my wife, his claim on you is void, and if we petition for adoption, my claim on William as a stepfather would be stronger than his as a father who abandoned his child. Beatrice's mind raced. What Quentin was suggesting made practical sense, but marriage wasn't something to enter into for mere practicality. Quentin, she began carefully, I can't let you sacrifice yourself this way. Marriage is a sacred bond, he finished for her. One I wouldn't propose if I didn't mean it with my whole heart. He took her free hand in his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. Beatrice, this isn't how or when I plan to tell you, but I love you. I think I started falling for you the first day you stood on your porch, exhausted but too proud to accept charity. I've watched you rebuild your life with grace and determination. I've seen how fiercely you love William, how hard you work, how kind you are despite everything you've endured. Tears filled Beatrice's eyes as Quentin continued. I love William too. That boy has become as dear to me as if he were my own flesh and blood, the thought of Marcus taking either of you away. He paused, emotion making his voice rough. I can't bear it. Not just because of what Marcus might do, but because you both belong with me. At least, that's how it feels in my heart. Beatrice was overwhelmed. Part of her feared this was happening too fast, that she was being rushed into another mistake. But a deeper part recognized that what she felt for Quentin was nothing like what she'd felt for Marcus. With Marcus, she'd been infatuated with his charm and promises. With Quentin, she'd grown to love the man he was, steady, honorable, kind, not the man he claimed to be. If you don't feel the same, Quentin said when she remained silent, I understand. We can find another way to deal with Marcus, but I needed you to know the truth of my feelings, regardless. I do feel the same, Beatrice said softly, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. I've been afraid to admit it, even to myself. After Marcus, I didn't trust my own judgment, but you've shown me what a good man truly is, Quentin. You've given William and me a home when we had none, asked for nothing in return, and treated us with nothing but respect and kindness. She looked down at William, sleeping peacefully, then back at Quentin. I love you. I think I have for months now, and if you're truly asking me to be your wife, not just to protect us from Marcus, but because you want us in your life permanently, then my answer is yes. The joy that transformed Quentin's face made Beatrice's heart swell. He leaned forward, hesitated, then gently pressed his lips to hers, a first kiss that was tender and reverent, mindful of the sleeping baby between them. We'll need to act quickly, he said when they parted. The circuit judge is at the fair today. We could be married before sundown if you're willing. Beatrice nodded, a sense of rightness settling over her. I'm willing. By late afternoon, word had spread throughout the fairgrounds. The judge agreed to perform the ceremony at sunset. Several of the ranch hands, upon hearing the news, decorated the bandstand with wildflowers and ribbons. Mrs. Chen, the laundress who had always been kind to Beatrice, offered a beautiful lace shawl for her to wear. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, casting golden light across the fairgrounds, Beatrice stood with William in her arms, facing Quentin before the judge. A crowd had gathered, some supportive, some merely curious, but all witnessing the unlikely union of the abandoned mother and the solitary rancher. The ceremony was simple. They exchanged vows and rings. Quentin had hurried to the jeweler's tent and purchased a simple gold band that fit Beatrice perfectly. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Quentin kissed her with a tenderness that made the onlookers cheer. As they turned to face the crowd, Beatrice caught sight of Marcus at the back, his expression thunderous. Their eyes met, and she saw the moment he realized he had lost. Without a word, he turned and walked away. That night, back at the ranch, Beatrice put William to bed in the cradle. Quentin had moved to the main house. Her belongings would follow tomorrow, but for tonight, she was home, truly home for the first time since arriving in Montana. In the parlor, Quentin waited for her, a small fire burning despite the summer warmth, casting the same intimate glow as on the night of the thunderstorm. "Are you sure about this?" he asked as she joined him. "Everything happened so quickly." "If you need time," Beatrice silenced him with a kiss, surprising herself with her boldness. "I'm sure," she whispered against his lips. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Later, as they lay together in the bedroom that was now theirs, Quentin traced gentle patterns on her bare shoulder. "I meant what I said about adopting William," he murmured. "I want him to have my name, to grow up knowing he has a father who chose him, who loves him." Tears pricked Beatrice's eyes at the thought. "He already loves you," she said. "The way his face lights up when you enter a room, he knows who truly cares for him." "And perhaps someday," Quentin added hesitantly, "he might have brothers or sisters to grow up with." The question held hope and vulnerability. Beatrice smiled, laying her hand against his cheek. "I'd like that very much." September brought cooler nights and the start of the harvest season. Beatrice and Quentin settled into married life with a natural ease that surprised them both. The adoption petition for William was filed, and though they knew it might take time, they had hoped that the judge would look favorably upon their case, especially given Marcus's documented abandonment. One crisp morning, Beatrice was in the garden harvesting the last of the summer vegetables when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she saw the sheriff riding toward the house, accompanied by another man she didn't recognize. Her heart sank. Had Marcus found some legal means to challenge their marriage? She set down her basket and hurried to meet them, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mrs. Tucker," the sheriff greeted her, tipping his hat. "Is your husband at home?" "He's in the barn," Beatrice replied, anxiety making her voice tight. "Is something wrong?" "Nothing wrong," the sheriff assured her. "Just some paperwork needs attending to. This is Mr. Reynolds from the land office in Helena." Relieved, Beatrice called for one of the hands to fetch Quentin, then invited the men to wait on the porch. When Quentin arrived, he greeted the sheriff with a handshake. "What brings you out this way, Sheriff?" Mr. Reynolds stepped forward, opening a leather portfolio. "I'm here about Marcus Landon," he said. Beatrice and Quentin exchanged worried glances. "What about him?" Quentin asked cautiously. "He came to the land office 3 days ago," Reynolds explained. "Said he wanted to sign over some property to his former wife and her child." He extracted a document and handed it to Quentin. "It's a small plot, about 5 acres, that borders the eastern edge of your ranch. He bought it last year, apparently." Beatrice was stunned. "Marcus owned land here, he never mentioned it. Paid cash for it," Reynolds confirmed. "And now he's signing it over to William, with you as trustee until the boy comes of age." He pulled out another document. He also signed this, a formal relinquishment of all parental rights and claims to the child. Says he's moving to California and won't be returning to the territory. Quentin examined the papers carefully. "Everything appears to be in order," he said, though his expression remained skeptical. "Did Landon say why he had this sudden change of heart?" Reynolds shook his head. "Didn't say much at all. Just seemed in a hurry to get the paperwork done and be on his way." After the officials left, Beatrice and Quentin sat on the porch steps, the documents between them. "I don't understand," Beatrice said. "Why would Marcus do this?" Quentin was thoughtful. "Maybe he realized he couldn't win against us legally, or maybe—" He hesitated. "Maybe there's a shred of decency in him after all." Beatrice wasn't convinced, but she was grateful nonetheless. "Whatever his reasons, this means William is truly ours now." "He always was," Quentin said, pulling her close. "But yes, now it's official. No one can take him from us." The following spring brought new life to the Tucker Ranch. The adoption was finalized in March, officially making William Tucker the legal son of Quentin and Beatrice. April saw the birth of their daughter, Elizabeth Beatrice Tucker, named for Quentin's first love and the woman who had healed his heart. As Beatrice sat on the porch, nursing Elizabeth while William, now a toddler, played at Quentin's feet, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here. 1 year ago, she had been abandoned, frightened, with no hope for the future. Now she was surrounded by love, with a husband who adored her, a son who was thriving, and a newborn daughter with her father's blue eyes. Quentin looked up from the wooden horse he was showing William and caught her watching them. The love in his eyes still took her breath away. "Happy?" he asked. "Completely," she replied, and meant it. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Quentin and Beatrice stood on the porch, his arm around her waist as they watched the stars emerge above the mountains. "I've been thinking," Quentin said, "about what would have happened if Marcus hadn't left that day." Beatrice leaned against him. "I try not to think about it." "I do," Quentin admitted. "Because as terrible as it was for you then, if he hadn't left, you wouldn't have come here, we wouldn't have found each other, William wouldn't be our son, Elizabeth wouldn't exist." He turned her to face him, his expression earnest in the fading light. "Sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we're meant to be." Beatrice reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines that sun and wind had etched there. "You're where I'm meant to be," she said softly. "You, William, Elizabeth, you're my home." Quentin smiled, the same rare, transformative smile that had first captured her heart. "And you're mine," he said, bending to kiss her beneath the vast Montana sky, their love as enduring as the land that had brought them together. From inside the house, Elizabeth's cry rose, followed by William's sleepy voice calling for his mama. Beatrice and Quentin exchanged knowing looks. The peaceful moment was over, but the life they had built together was just beginning. Hand in hand, they went inside to tend to their children, grateful for the twists of fate that had led them to this perfect happiness.